Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Naga Manchetti and Charlie State.
Our headlines today. Death, violence and chaos in Washington, D.C. 4 people die as President Trump's supporters storm America's Capitol building.
The rioters were trying to stop US lawmakers approving the results of the presidential election.
It's not protest, it's insurrection.
Amid widespread condemnation of the violence, we'll bring you the latest from Washington with the developments and reaction from politicians and witnesses.
Family doctors begin offering the new Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine as part of the biggest programme of its kind in NHS history.
As millions of households get to grips with the return of online schooling, we look at the efforts to help families without the laptops and computers they need to learn.
And I'm looking at the millions of school meals going to waste. Good morning. The last-minute decision not to fully reopen primaries means most meals have been given away or thrown out. I'll look at what can be done and the impact on suppliers.
And good morning. Manchester City are heading back to Wembley. They're through to a 4th League Cup final in a row after beating their city rivals, Manchester United.
Good morning. We've got a band of rain, sleet and snow moving out of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland into northern England and North Wales through the course of the day. Ahead of it, there's some ice to watch out for and some freezing fog patches, and behind it, further wintry showers and the risk of ice too. But I'll have more details in about 10 minutes.
Good morning. It's Thursday, the 7th of January. Our top story: 4 people have died in violent clashes at the heart of America's democracy, where Congress had been meeting to approve the results of the US presidential election.
Donald Trump's supporters stormed the US Congress building. 1 woman was shot and 3 other people had what are described as medical emergencies.
More than 50 people were arrested and 14 police officers were injured.
Let's go straight to our Washington correspondent, Lebi Duseko, who's inside the Capitol building now. Lebi, very good morning to you. It is a much calmer scene this morning, of course, but this began with a protest and then a number of people storming the building. Tell us more.
Yeah, I was actually standing at this very spot, Charlie, doing a live on air when we saw policemen coming in, and they said that we needed to move and shelter away from where we were. We were moved into a tunnel. Wasn't quite clear what was going on, but then we heard that the Capitol building had been breached. This happened shortly after Donald Trump had given a speech in which he encouraged his supporters to come up from just outside the White House, up the road here to the Capitol buildings and essentially make their protests heard. And they certainly did that, but not in a way anyone could have really predicted or expected. Really quite shocking scenes. We saw tear gas having to be employed in the Capitol buildings. This is the seat of democracy in America. We saw demonstrators jumping on the platforms on the floor of Congress there. A demonstrator that broke into Nancy Pelosi, that is the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, putting his feet on her table, taking pictures there, people smashing windows, incredibly scary scenes really to watch. We, by that time, had moved to a cafeteria where we were being kept along with some other people. The whole building was on lockdown at that point. And you could hear audible gasps at the beginning when people saw these scenes that were happening outside the building. You know, we were watching them on TV as they were taking place. As the hours ticked by, we really were stunned by what was going on. It really has been quite shocking in terms of what's taken place. And as you said, 4 people have died today.
Libra, and amongst the images that we're seeing this morning, there are some images from within the chamber which show guns being drawn, presumably by the police inside as the protesters are coming into the building, and we see people abseiling, climbing down the inside of the chamber.
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a striking photo of 2 security officers holding guns, trying to stop people breaking into the chamber, breaking onto the floor. A couple of the women that I was speaking to when we were watching what was happening from inside the cafeteria actually work on the floor of the house, and they were saying they're not even allowed to touch those desks. They were shocked, appalled, and really quite hurt, actually, by the level of disrespect, they said, for this seat of democracy in the United States. I spoke to somebody else who works for a member of the House of Representatives. He said he had to help him take cover, and he accused Donald Trump of really attacking the democracy of his country.
Well, you described the very shocking scenes. What happened subsequently was, of course, that those people who had been working there and voting and going through the democratic process took cover. But then take us through the events that unfolded later, because the process has carried on.
Yeah, it was really interesting hearing the reactions to what was happening. At first, Donald Trump put out some quite defiant tweets that were then taken down by Twitter. We then had this very stern address from Joe Biden, the president-elect, saying that this was really an attack on everything that is American, essentially. But you also then started to have Republicans, so everybody from former President George W. Bush to even Mike Pence and allies like Mike Pompeo, saying that what had happened was outrageous, un-American, and should not have happened at all. So you had this moment when Nancy Pelosi, she leads the Democrats in the House, and again other Republicans said, look, we are going to get this job done. The demonstrators, or the protesters, rioters as they really were, had tried to stop us doing our job, and we're not going to have it. Mitch McConnell, who is the lead senator for the Republicans, called the protesters unhinged and said that they had tried to essentially subvert democracy, and he wasn't going to have it. And the response that they have had is to continue with the job in hand. So they have continued with the process. They are determined to finish the certification process this evening. There have been a couple of objections put forward, only one that we've seen them break and discuss that had the requisite support for that in both chambers. We are hearing, just on one agency at the moment, AP, that senators have decided not to uphold that objection. So it doesn't hold, because you need both houses to uphold that.
Libby, you mentioned the comments by Donald Trump, and that was on his Twitter account. His account's now been closed down, so we have heard no comment from him directly via Twitter. But has there been any other statement from the president?
Nothing really. I mean, the video that there was a video that was taped in the White House, I think it was, where he said that he finally told his protesters to go home, but also kind of said that this is what happened, and when kind of repeating the claims that we've heard, the incorrect claims that there is no evidence of about this being a fraudulent election, and kind of implying that the protesters or his supporters were pushed to this. That is something that has been pretty strongly rebutted by his own party. I mean, the Republicans' own chief of communications saying that this is domestic terrorism, what happens. So it's difficult to see where Donald Trump goes from here. I'm sure it must be very frustrating for him not being able to speak directly to his audience, but certainly his party is making its feelings clear.
Lebu, thank you very much.
Now, Boris Johnson has joined politicians from around the world by condemning the disgraceful scenes of rioters in Washington, D.C. In a tweet, the Prime Minister called for a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. Labour leader Keir Starmer described the violent protests as a direct attack on democracy. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon called the events utterly horrifying.
Time now is 6:09. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is being rolled out to general practice in England for the first time today.
So far, all the jabs have been administered in hospitals. Well, now the programme is due to be expanded to hundreds of community-based sites over the next few weeks. Here's more from our health correspondent Dominic Hughes.
You had your first vaccine here 3 weeks ago. Yes.
Already more than 1 million people have received their first vaccinations against the coronavirus. But the target of reaching 13 million of the most vulnerable by mid-February is going to be tough to hit. Unlike the Pfizer vaccine, which needs to be stored at ultra-low temperatures, the Oxford jab can be kept in regular fridges that every GP surgery has. It's also much easier to move, and so better suited for use in care homes and for those who can't leave the house. GPs say they're ready to start administering the jab, despite some frustrations over supply.
I just think we need some explanations. Why has there been this hold up? Why are some practices getting it and others, like mine, not being given the vaccine? Why doesn't someone tell us what is going on?
In England, 7 big vaccination centres are opening. Over the next week, jabs will become available in more than 200 GP surgeries and hospitals, as well as through a pilot scheme involving local pharmacies. Amid the grim news of rising infections, the pressures on hospitals and a growing death toll, this is another ray of hope for the coming months. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
The weekly Clap for Carers, which began during the first lockdown, is to return tonight under a new name of Clap for Heroes.
It's aimed at recognising carers, teachers, homeschooling parents and all frontline workers. The idea of clapping and banging pots from doorsteps originally began as a one-off to support NHS staff 3 days after the UK went into lockdown for the first time. So those are the images from back in March, which seems like a very long time ago.
Seems a long time ago.
Yeah.
Mind you, time is all kind of a bit warped, I think, at the moment, isn't it?
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.